I'm going to tell you about the time I systematically destroyed my high school teacher's career, and honestly, I'd do it again. Before you judge me, hear me out. This isn't some petty revenge story about a kid who got a bad grade. This is about a man who abused his power, humiliated a 17-year-old in front of hundreds of people, and got exactly what he deserved. My name is Jake, and this happened during my senior year of high school in Austin, Texas. I'm 23 now, in my final year of college, and I still think about what went down. Not with regret, with satisfaction. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Mr. Richard Hendricks. To everyone at Westlake High School, he was a legend. He'd been teaching AP English there for 15 years, and he was one of those teachers that students either loved or hated, there was no in between. He was in his early 40s, always wore suits to class, quoted Shakespeare at random moments, and had this whole passionate educator who truly cares about literature persona going on. He was also the faculty advisor for the school newspaper, coach of the academic decathlon team, and he ran this prestigious creative writing club that met after school. Getting into that club was like getting into an Ivy League school. He only accepted 10 students per year, and having it on your college applications was basically a golden ticket. Everyone knew that Mr. Hendricks' recommendation letters were legendary. Kids who got them got into Stanford, Princeton, Yale. I wanted into that club desperately. I'd been writing since I was 12, short stories, poetry, the beginning of what I hoped would eventually be a novel. Writing was my thing. I wasn't the best athlete, I wasn't the most popular kid, but I could write. My English teachers had been telling me for years that I had talent. So at the beginning of senior year, I applied to Mr. Hendricks' Creative Writing Club. You had to submit a portfolio of your work and go through an interview. I spent weeks preparing. I submitted what I thought was my best stuff, a short story about a kid dealing with his parents' divorce. My parents had split up sophomore year, so it was personal, some poetry, and the first chapter of the novel I was working on. I got rejected. Not just rejected, I didn't even get an interview. I got a form email saying thank you for your interest, but we're unable to offer you a spot at this time. 10 kids got in. I knew most of them. Some of them were good writers, sure, but a couple of them were just rich kids whose parents donated a lot of money to the school. One girl who got in had literally never taken a creative writing class before. It stung, but I told myself it was fine. I'd focus on my other activities, keep writing on my own, and my other teachers could write my recommendation letters. No big deal. Then I had to take Mr. Hendricks' AP English class. It was required for seniors in the advanced track, and he was the only teacher who taught it. So like it or not, I was going to be spending an hour a day with the man who'd rejected me. At first, it was fine. I kept my head down, did the work, participated in class discussions. Mr. Hendricks had this teaching style where he'd cold call on students and expect you to have deep, analytical things to say about whatever we were reading. If you gave a shallow answer, he'd tear it apart in front of everyone. But if you gave a good answer, he'd praise you like you'd just solved world hunger. I learned pretty quickly that I was good at his class. I understood the books we read, I could analyze themes and symbolism, and I could hold my own in discussions. A few times, Mr. Hendricks even complimented my insights. I started to think that maybe the creative writing club thing had just been a numbers game, and he didn't actually have anything against me. Then came the personal essay assignment. It was October, and Mr. Hendricks assigned us a personal narrative essay. 5 to 7 pages, about a significant experience that changed our perspective on something. It was worth 20% of our grade for the semester. He said he wanted us to be vulnerable, to really dig deep and write something meaningful. He said the best essay would be read aloud at the senior assembly before winter break. I worked my ass off on that essay. I wrote about the summer after my parents' divorce, when I'd gone to stay with my grandfather in Colorado for a month. My grandpa had just been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's, and watching this man who'd always been sharp and funny start to lose pieces of himself was devastating. But it was also this weird bonding experience. We'd go fishing every morning, and he'd tell me the same stories over and over, and instead of being frustrated, I learned to just be present with him. To appreciate the moment instead of mourning what was being lost. I poured my heart into that essay. I revised it a dozen times. I had my mom read it, and she cried. I had my friend Sarah read it, and she said it was the best thing I'd ever written. I submitted it feeling genuinely proud. 2 weeks later, Mr. Hendricks handed back our graded essays. I got a C+. A fucking C+. On an essay I knew was good. On an essay that was probably the best thing I'd written up to that point in my life. His comments were brutal. He said my prose was pedestrian. He said the emotional beats were manipulative and cliched. He said the whole thing read like I was trying too hard to seem deep and that my attempts at profundity fell flat. He said real writers don't need to manufacture sentiment, they earn it. I was devastated. But more than that, I was confused. I'd had other teachers read my writing before. I'd won a regional writing contest sophomore year. I knew I wasn't a perfect writer, but I also knew I wasn't bad. And this essay, specifically, I knew was good. I stayed after class to talk to him about it. I was respectful. I asked him if he could explain his comments more, help me understand where I'd gone wrong so I could improve. He looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as disdain and said, "Jake, not everyone is meant to be a writer. Some people just don't have the gift. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can focus your energy on things you might actually be good at." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I mumbled something and left, and I spent the rest of the day feeling like shit. That night, I read through my essay again, trying to see what he saw. I couldn't. It wasn't perfect, sure, but it wasn't C+ work. It just wasn't. I started paying more attention in his class after that. I noticed that the kids in his creative writing club always seemed to get A's on their essays, even when their work was objectively not that great. I noticed that he had favorites, mostly kids from wealthy families. Mostly kids who kissed up to him constantly, and mostly girls he seemed a little too friendly with. There was this one girl, Ashley, who was in his creative writing club. She was pretty, popular, and her dad was on the school board. Mr. Hendricks absolutely fawned over her. He'd use her essays as examples of excellent work in class. He'd make comments about how she was going to be a famous author someday. Meanwhile, her essays were fine but not exceptional. I'd read some of them when we did peer reviews, and they were well written but not groundbreaking. I started to realize that Mr. Hendricks' legendary status wasn't based on his actual teaching ability. It was based on his ability to play favorites and make the right kids feel special. And if you weren't one of his chosen ones, you were nobody to him. But I tried to let it go. I focused on other classes, kept writing on my own, started working on my college applications. I got my recommendations from other teachers, my history teacher and my journalism advisor, both of whom actually seemed to value my work. Then came November, and Mr. Hendricks announced which essay had won the competition to be read at the senior assembly. Ashley's essay. About her summer volunteering at an animal shelter and learning the importance of compassion. I'm not saying it was a bad essay. It was decent. But it wasn't the best essay in the class. Not by a long shot. My friend Marcus had written an incredible piece about being a black kid in a predominantly white school and code switching between different social groups. Another kid, David, had written about losing his sister to cancer. Both of those essays were gut-wrenching and beautifully written. But Ashley's won. And I knew why. Because Mr. Hendricks had chosen his favorite, and the rest of us never had a chance. The senior assembly was in mid-December, right before winter break. The whole school attended, all 4 grades, plus faculty and some parents. It was in the auditorium, and it was a big deal. Ashley read her essay on stage, and everyone applauded. Mr. Hendricks stood off to the side, beaming with pride like a parent at a dance recital. After Ashley finished, the principal got up to make some announcements. Standard stuff about winter break, reminders about behavior expectations, upcoming events. Then she said, "And now, Mr. Hendricks has asked to say a few words." This wasn't on the program. Mr. Hendricks walked up to the microphone, and he had this weird energy about him. He seemed almost giddy. "Thank you, Principal Morrison," he said. "I wanted to take a moment to talk about the importance of authenticity in writing. One of the things I always tell my students is that a writer's credibility comes from their honesty. When you sit down to write, you're asking readers to trust you, to believe you, to care about what you have to say. And that trust is sacred." I had no idea where he was going with this. Neither did anyone else. The auditorium was quiet. "Unfortunately," he continued, Not all students understand this. Some students think they can manufacture authenticity. They think they can manipulate emotions by inventing experiences or exaggerating truths. And that's not just bad writing, it's dishonest. My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. Earlier this semester, I had a student submit a personal essay about spending time with his grandfather who had Alzheimer's. It was a touching story. Beautifully written. Even. But something about it felt off to me, so I did some checking. Oh my God. He was talking about me. In front of the entire school. I felt like I couldn't breathe. It turns out, Mr. Hendricks said, his voice dripping with disappointment, this student's grandfather doesn't have Alzheimer's. In fact, I spoke with his mother, and the entire story was fabricated. The fishing trips, the bonding experience, all of it, made up. The auditorium erupted in whispers. People were turning around, trying to figure out who he was talking about. My face was burning. I wanted to disappear. I'm not going to name names, Mr. Hendricks said, though his eyes were staring directly at where I was sitting in the senior section. But I wanted to use this as a teaching moment. Integrity matters. Honesty matters. And if you're willing to lie in a high school essay, what does that say about your character? He wrapped up his little speech with some platitudes about being truthful and working hard, and then he walked off the stage. The principal looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict him. The assembly ended shortly after, and as we were filing out, I could feel people staring at me. Whispering. My phone started blowing up immediately. Was that about you? Dude, did you really make up that story? That's so messed up if you lied about your grandpa having Alzheimer's. I was in shock. I couldn't even respond. Because here's the thing, I hadn't made up anything. My grandfather did have Alzheimer's. Early stage, but it was a real diagnosis. The fishing trips had happened. Everything in my essay was true. I went straight to the front office and asked to speak with Principal Morrison. I was shaking. I told her that Mr. Hendricks had completely lied, that my grandfather's diagnosis was real, that I could provide medical documentation if needed. I asked why he would claim to have spoken with my mother when he hadn't. Principal Morrison looked extremely uncomfortable. She said she'd look into it and ask me to have my mother call her. I called my mom right there, and she was furious. She said Mr. Hendricks had never contacted her, and she was going to come to the school immediately. My mom showed up within 30 minutes. She brought medical records, documentation of my grandfather's diagnosis, everything. She demanded a meeting with Mr. Hendricks and Principal Morrison. That meeting happened the next day. My mom, me, Principal Morrison, Mr. Hendricks, and the vice principal were all crammed into a conference room. My mom laid out all the documentation proving that everything in my essay was true. She demanded to know why Mr. Hendricks had claimed to speak with her when he hadn't. Mr. Hendricks backpedaled so fast. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said he'd spoken with someone, he couldn't remember who had told him that story seemed exaggerated. He said he'd made an error in judgment by bringing it up publicly and he apologized. But his apology was hollow. He didn't look sorry. He looked annoyed at being caught. Principal Morrison assured us that it wouldn't happen again and suggested we all move forward. My mom demanded that Mr. Hendricks issue a public apology at the next assembly, clearing my name in front of the same audience he'd humiliated me in front of. Principal Morrison said she'd take it under advisement. Which meant no. I went home that day feeling more angry than I'd ever felt in my life. Mr. Hendricks had publicly humiliated me based on a complete lie, and he was going to get away with it because he was the beloved teacher with 15 years of seniority. Meanwhile, I was just a student. My word meant nothing. That's when I decided I was going to destroy him. Not physically, obviously. I'm not violent, and I'm not stupid. But I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person Mr. Richard Hendricks really was. I started gathering evidence. I began documenting everything in his class, every biased comment, every instance of favoritism, every time he praised one of his club members for mediocre work while tearing down someone else for something good. I talked to other students who'd had bad experiences with him. Turns out, there were a lot of us. Students he'd rejected from his club who felt like it was purely based on social status or how much their parents donated to the school. Students he'd given unfair grades to. Students he'd made uncomfortable with inappropriate comments. There was this one junior, Emma, who told me that Mr. Hendricks had made comments about her appearance in class multiple times, always framed as compliments but in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. He'd tell her she looked nice, ask about her weekend plans, stand a little too close when helping her with her work. Another student, Ben, who was openly gay, said Mr. Hendricks had given him a C on an essay about coming out to his parents, with comments about how the topic was too political for a personal narrative. Meanwhile, Ashley's essay about volunteering at an animal shelter, which was arguably more political since it was advocating for animal rights, got an A. I started documenting all of this. I created a detailed spreadsheet of grades in his class, comparing the work quality, based on peer reviews we'd done, with the actual grades received. The correlation between being in his creative writing club or being from a wealthy family and getting high grades was impossible to ignore. I also started looking into the creative writing club itself. I requested information from the school about how members were selected, what the criteria were. I found out that there were no formal criteria, it was entirely at Mr. Hendricks' discretion. No rubric, no blind selection process, nothing. Then I got really lucky. One of the seniors in the creative writing club, a girl named Monica, approached me in January. She said she'd heard about what happened at the assembly and felt terrible about it. She said she'd been uncomfortable with some of Mr. Hendricks' behavior in the club but hadn't known what to do about it. She told me that Mr. Hendricks played favorites even within the club. The girls he found attractive got more attention, more feedback, more opportunities. He'd make comments about their appearance, invite them to stay after club meetings to discuss their work, and generally created an environment that felt inappropriate. Monica also told me something that made my blood boil. Mr. Hendricks had been ghostwriting college recommendation letters for certain students. Not just editing them, actually writing them. He'd have students give him a list of their accomplishments, and he'd craft these glowing, detailed letters that were completely his words, not his genuine assessment of the student. And he only did this for his absolute favorites, mostly the wealthy kids whose parents could donate to the school or help his career in other ways. This was gold. Because teachers ghostwriting recommendation letters is actually a violation of college admissions ethics policies. If colleges found out, those students' applications could be invalidated. But I needed proof. Monica couldn't give me copies of the letters, that would be too obvious. But she did give me something better. She told me about Mr. Hendricks' computer. He had this laptop he brought to club meetings, and he'd leave it open sometimes while he stepped out of the room to take phone calls or talk to students in the hall. Monica had seen him working on recommendation letters during club time, just sitting there typing away while students were supposed to be working on their own writing. She suggested that if someone happened to be near his laptop when he stepped out, and if that someone knew that Mr. Hendricks was too arrogant to put a password lock on his screensaver timeout, well, hypothetically, that someone might be able to access some interesting files. I'm not going to lie and say I didn't consider this carefully. What Monica was suggesting was essentially hacking, which was illegal and could get me in serious trouble. But I was 17 years old, furious, and convinced that this man needed to be stopped. So I did it. I joined the school's tutoring program, which met in the same hallway where the creative writing club met. One day in late January, I timed it perfectly. I waited until Mr. Hendricks left his classroom during the club meeting to talk to another teacher down the hall. I walked in like I was looking for a tutoring room, saw his laptop sitting there open on his desk, and quickly pulled out my flash drive. His computer wasn't password protected. I accessed his documents folder and copied everything that looked relevant, recommendation letters, student essays with his comments, personal notes about students, emails. The whole thing took maybe 3 minutes, and then I left before anyone noticed I'd been there. When I got home and started going through the files, I hit the jackpot. He had dozens of recommendation letters saved, and it was immediately obvious which ones he'd actually written based on genuine observations and which ones were completely fabricated. The ghost-written ones all had a similar writing style and used phrases that appeared in multiple letters. But that wasn't even the worst thing I found. He had a document called Club Selections that was basically his personal notes about students who'd applied to the creative writing club over the years. And the notes were damning. For some students, good writer but scholarship kid, won't bring anything to program. For others, parents donated $5,000 last year, except. About one girl, cute, writes decent poetry, could be interesting to work with. About me, thinks he's better than he is, reject to knock him down a peg. I sat there reading these notes, feeling sick. This man was supposed to be an educator, someone who nurtured talent and helped students grow. Instead, he was playing games with our futures based on our parents' bank accounts and whether he found us attractive. But I still wasn't sure what to do with all this information. If I went public with it, I'd have to admit I'd accessed his computer without permission. I could get expelled. Maybe even face legal consequences. That's when my mom's lawyer friend, Tom, came into play. My mom had told him about the situation, and he volunteered to give me some informal advice. I showed him everything I'd found, and he told me exactly how to proceed in a way that would protect me legally while still exposing Mr. Hendricks. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity: submit everything anonymously to the school board and the local newspaper simultaneously, framed as a concerned parent who had gained access to these materials. Don't claim to be a student, don't include any information that could identify me as the source. Just present the evidence and let it speak for itself. Tom helped me put together a comprehensive package: screenshots of the documents, analysis of the grade disparities, testimonies from students, with their permission and names redacted, and a detailed letter explaining all the ethical violations. We sent it in early March, right as college acceptance letters were starting to come out. The timing was intentional. If colleges found out about the ghost-written recommendation letters while they were still making decisions, there could be serious consequences for Mr. Hendricks. The school board launched an investigation immediately. So did the newspaper, which ran a story about allegations against a veteran teacher at a local high school. They didn't name Mr. Hendricks at first, but everyone in the school knew who they were talking about. Mr. Hendricks was put on administrative leave within a week. The creative writing club was suspended. The school brought in an outside investigator to interview students. It was chaos. Parents were furious, some because their kids had been denied opportunities based on favoritism, others because their kids might lose their college acceptances if the recommendation letters were invalidated. Students were divided between those who'd always suspected something was wrong with Mr. Hendricks and those who thought he was being unfairly targeted. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, more and more students came forward with their own stories about Mr. Hendricks. The girl Emma, who'd been uncomfortable with his comments about her appearance, filed a formal complaint. Other students talked about the favoritism, the unfair grading, the inappropriate behavior. The investigator also found evidence that Mr. Hendricks had been accepting gifts from parents, expensive bottles of wine, tickets to shows, even cash donations for his classroom supplies that he'd pocketed personally. All violations of school district ethics policies. In late April, the school board announced their decision: Mr. Hendricks was fired, effective immediately. He would lose his teaching license. The recommendation letters he'd written would be flagged, and he would be required to provide a list of all students he'd written letters for so that colleges could be notified. The newspaper ran a full expose the next day, naming Mr. Hendricks and detailing all the violations. His picture was on the front page. The story got picked up by bigger outlets. It became this whole thing about corruption in public schools and the college admissions process. Mr. Hendricks tried to fight it. He hired a lawyer and claimed he was being targeted by disgruntled students. But the evidence was overwhelming. His career was over. I never told anyone at school that I was behind it. Monica knew, and my mom knew. And Tom knew, but that was it. As far as everyone else was concerned, it had been a parent who'd exposed him. The school held a new competition for the senior speech at graduation, since Ashley's win was now tainted by the favoritism scandal. They brought in outside judges, local college professors, to read all the essays blind. My essay won. The one Mr. Hendricks had given a C+. The judges called it emotionally resonant and beautifully crafted. I read it at graduation in front of the whole school, and this time, I wasn't humiliated. I was vindicated. After graduation, a few things happened that felt like cosmic justice. Ashley didn't get into her top choice schools. Turns out Mr. Hendricks' recommendation letter had been a big part of her applications, and when colleges found out it was potentially ghost-written, they reconsidered. She ended up at a decent state school, which was fine, but not the Ivy League future she'd been expecting. Several other students from the creative writing club had similar experiences. Their acceptances weren't revoked, but their scholarships were reconsidered, their positions in honors programs were questioned. Some of them probably deserved it, they'd benefited from a corrupt system. Others were just kids who hadn't known any better, and I felt bad about that collateral damage. As for me, I got into my top choice school, a small liberal arts college with an excellent creative writing program. I got in based on my actual work, recommendations from teachers who genuinely knew me, and essays that I actually wrote. No favoritism, no connections, just merit. I'm finishing up my senior year now, about to graduate with a degree in English and creative writing. I've had some of my short stories published in literary journals. I'm working on that novel I started in high school. And I'm doing it all knowing that I earned it, that no one handed it to me or gave me an unfair advantage. Sometimes I think about Mr. Hendricks and wonder what happened to him. I looked him up once. He tried to get a job at a private school in another state, but they must have found out about what happened because he didn't get it. Last I heard, he was working at some office job, not teaching. And yeah, sometimes I feel a little bit guilty about the role I played in that. He lost his career, his reputation, his identity as this beloved teacher. That's a pretty harsh consequence. But then I remember standing in that auditorium, feeling the eyes of everyone on me, hearing him call me a liar in front of the entire school. I remember reading his notes about me, reject to knock him down a peg, and realizing that he'd sabotaged my opportunities out of pure spite. I remember all the other students he'd hurt, the ones he'd made uncomfortable, the ones he'd denied opportunities to because they weren't rich enough or attractive enough or connected enough. And I don't feel guilty anymore. Mr. Hendricks didn't lose his career because of me. He lost it because of his own actions, his own ethical violations, his own corruption. I just brought those actions to light. If he'd been doing his job with integrity, there would have been nothing for me to expose. People say that revenge is petty, that the high road is about forgiveness and moving on. And maybe they're right. Maybe I should have just let it go, focused on my own path, trusted that karma would eventually catch up with him. But I'm not sorry I didn't. Sometimes the high road means standing up for yourself and others, even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it means gathering evidence and bringing corruption to light. Sometimes it means making sure that people who abuse their power face consequences. Mr. Hendricks spent 15 years playing God with students' futures, deciding who deserved opportunities based on favoritism and personal benefit rather than actual merit. He created an environment where students felt unsafe and uncomfortable. He violated ethics policies and probably laws. And he did it all while maintaining this image as a passionate, dedicated educator. He deserved what happened to him. And if I played a role in making sure he faced consequences, then I'm glad I did. My only regret is that it took so long. How many students before me had been hurt by him? How many opportunities had been stolen? How many talented kids had been rejected? How many inappropriate situations had occurred? If I'd acted sooner, maybe some of that could have been prevented. But I was just a 17-year-old kid trying to survive high school. I didn't have the power or the knowledge to take on a teacher with 15 years of institutional protection. It took him publicly humiliating me for me to get angry enough, desperate enough, to figure out how to fight back. And fight back I did. I'm not telling this story to encourage people to hack into their teachers' computers or to pursue revenge against anyone who wrongs them. What I did was legally questionable at best, and I got lucky that it didn't blow back on me. But I am saying this, if someone in a position of power is abusing that power, if they're hurting people and violating ethical standards, and if the institution that's supposed to hold them accountable is failing to do so, sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands. Sometimes you have to be willing to take risks to do the right thing. Document everything. Find allies. Get legal advice. Protect yourself. But don't stay silent just because speaking up is scary or risky. The thing about people like Mr. Hendricks is that they rely on the silence of their victims. They rely on the fact that most people won't fight back, that institutions will protect them, that their reputation and seniority will shield them from consequences. They get away with it because we let them. I decided not to let him get away with it. And yeah, it was partially about revenge. I'm not going to pretend I was purely motivated by noble ideals of justice. I was hurt and angry, and I wanted him to suffer the way he'd made me suffer. But it was also about something bigger than that. It was about making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. It was about exposing a corrupt system. It was about standing up for all the students who'd been denied opportunities or made uncomfortable but were too afraid to speak up. Was it worth it? Hell yes. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Mr. Hendricks thought he could humiliate me with impunity, that I was just some student he could tear down without consequence. He thought I'd slink away embarrassed and broken, maybe drop his class, maybe transfer schools. Instead, I ended his career. And I'm not sorry at all. If he ever reads this, which I doubt, but you never know, I want him to know something, that 17-year-old kid you tried to destroy. He's doing great. He's about to graduate from an excellent college. He's getting his work published. He's living the life of a writer that you tried to convince him he could never have. And you? You're working in an office somewhere, your teaching license revoked, your reputation destroyed, your legacy tarnished. I didn't just get revenge. I won. Thanks for reading. I know this was long, and I know some of you will think I'm a vindictive asshole. Maybe I am. But I'm a vindictive asshole who stood up to a bully with institutional power, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. To any students out there dealing with teachers who abuse their power, document everything, find support, and don't be afraid to fight back. You have more power than you think. And sometimes, justice requires taking a risk.